Harimi, harimi, al tirai, harimi, al tirai. Imri le'are Yehuda, hine Elokeichem. Harimi, harimi, al tirai.
Oh, well, don't you want to use it?
I got one in my lap.
Oh,
We're all
I didn't
set.
see it.
We are all set. Where are we? Parshas Nasso. This is the longest parsha.
I heard
This is
so.
the longest?
Longest parsha. Non-double parsha, longest parsha.
Non-double.
So longest single parsha. It's on page 748.
740.
So there's so much here.
Oh boy, you're right.
One of the reason it's so long is because the end of the parsha talks about the sacrifices that the heads of the tribes brought. And instead of saying that this is the sacrifice that all the tribes brought and just
I'm
list
sorry,
the sacrifice.
749?
748, 749, 748.
Yeah, either one.
So instead of listing all the sacrifices that each tribe brought and just say, this is the sacrifice, it goes through it and says it over and over again, 12 times. And it repeats it. So if we have time, we'll talk about why the Torah repeats it so many times. Amen. So that's one thing in the parsha. But first, we have earlier than that. We have the priestly blessings, which you just made over Shavuos.
That's right.
That's on page
Yeah,
762.
The Zukin.
And then I would like to discuss what we have on page 752. Sota. 752, yeah. Sota, as ArtScroll say, / the wayward wife. The wayward wife.
Could be so lucky.
Okay, so what is Sota? Just to review,
Potion.
it is something like that.
Yeah? What's
So-
that mean?
Well, in a manner of saying.
Right. So back in the day, when we had a temple, we had a Mishkan. If a man saw his wife hanging around a fella a little too much, suspicious guy, he would say, hey, don't hang around that guy anymore. And if two witnesses would see her secluded with the guy, the witnesses did not see them doing any intimate action, like the intimate act. They didn't see that, but they saw they were hanging out. She was hanging out with this guy, and the husband warned her, "Don't stay away from this guy." So what they would do is they would bring her to the temple, and they would say, "Do you want to confess? Did you do anything wrong?" And if she didn't confess, they would take Hashem's name, and they would erase it and put it into this, as you said, potion or this liquid, and she would drink it. And if she was guilty, if she cohabitated with this fella that wasn't her husband, she would die. Her womb, her stomach would explode, and the man that she committed this act with would also pass away. And if she was innocent, she would be blessed to have children. That's the Sota in a nutshell. I would like to talk a little bit about some more details about it and some lessons that we learn from the Sota procedure, from the Avos. But you see, the Torah puts a lot of emphasis on not being overcome by our physical drives. And this is something we've talked about a lot. Right? The Torah says in Vayikra Yerches Gimel, Kamaisa Eretz Mitzrayim Asher Yeshavtem Ba Lo Sasu, like what they used to do in Egypt, don't do. Kamaisa Eretz Canaan, and like they do in the land of Canaan, Asher Ani Mevi Eschem Shama, that I'm bringing you there, Lo Sasu. Don't go in their way. Don't do what they do. Don't go in their statutes. And the Canaanites, the Egyptians especially, were known to be very perverted. They did a lot of unholy acts. So the Torah warns us not to be engaged in these unholy acts. Because if a person spends his life just chasing his physical drives, then he has not only is he making himself on a lower spiritual level, but he also doesn't have the time and the mindset to focus in life on what's really important, which is to grow spiritually and to get closer to Hashem. So when a person is just totally subsumed by his physical drives, specifically this physical drive, then he will not do with his life what is most important, and he will just spend his life chasing these drives. So, I was going to say something, but I forgot. Okay, it happens. Maybe it'll.
Happens when you get older.
Yeah, maybe it will. Maybe it'll come back. So the Sota was something that you have this woman who's suspected of doing something wrong, of committing adultery. It was a way to check whether she committed the adultery or not. Now the Ramban says something very interesting here. Nachmanides. It says, V'hine, ein b'chol mishpatei haTorah davar tali b'neis zulasi ha'inyan hazeh. Shehu pela v'neis, kavu sheyasir b'Yisrael b'yosam rubam osam ritzono shel makom. He says that there is nothing in the Torah. You can look through the entire Torah, you will never find something that's dependent on a miracle except for Sota, except for this parsha right here. It's a miracle that happens. You give her water with Hashem's name in it, and she's guilty, she's going to die. That's basically a halacha that is dependent on a miracle. And he says he's going to say the reason ki chafetz lamantzit kol yasser anashim shalot hasena kazimas yasser ha'amim ulanakos Yisrael min mamzerus shu re'urim lahashur shchina b'seicham. He says that the idea of this mitzvah of this miracle that happens, is to remove these immoral women from the Jewish people and to make sure that there are not illegitimate children. Right? There's such a thing as a mamzer. A mamzer is a person who, a baby who was born from certain illegitimate, illicit relationships. One of those is a married woman who has a child from another man. That's a mamzer. And a mamzer has a prohibition. He can only marry another mamzer. He can't. Okay. So the Ramban continues and he writes, "Lofikach pasaka inyan hazeh ma'isa mishah sheniskalkalu ba'averus." He says the miracle of Sota stopped working when the Jewish people started doing sins. Like it says, "Mishirabu hanoafim pasku me Sota," when there became a lot of philanderers, we'll say, in the Jewish people. A lot of people were not keeping the Torah's laws in this area so well. Then the Sota stopped working. So the Sota was something, it was a schus, it was a merit for the Jewish people to clean the Jewish people of sin, but it only worked when they're on a very high level. Because if you're on a very high level, then Hashem helps us to totally make everything spiritually clean. But if we're not on that level, then we don't deserve it. So there was a certain time in Jewish history where the Sota wouldn't work anymore. And if you learn Masechah Sota, there's a lot of laws that if the husband did anything wrong, it wouldn't work. Right? If he also had illicit relations, then the Mei Sota wouldn't work. So this thing was only when the Jewish people were on a very high level and the husband was a very holy person, then it was a merit, a schus, that it should work. Okay. So there are some other aspects of the Sota procedure that I think can teach us some other things. The ideas I'm sharing here are from Rav Chaim Shmulevitz. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Mir Yeshiva in Jerusalem. You just want very little soda, or you want some liquor?
Yeah, no, that's just water.
Oh, I think there were cups in there. Yeah. Thought we were going to start drinking. Okay.
Not me, someone else.
So I'm going to read some things that from a Mishnah in Sota, what it says about a Sota procedure. It says, first, they would take her to the big rabbinical court in Jerusalem. There's different courts, rabbinical courts. Just like we have a court system in the United States. You know, you have the appeals court, you have the district court, you have the Supreme Court. So we have a court of 3. That's usually with monetary things. And there's a court of 23, and there's a court of 70. So the court of 70 is the Beis Din Hagadol, the Sanhedrin, that sits in Jerusalem, it sits in the temple. That's like the Supreme Court of the Jewish people. So they would bring her to this court, in front of this court with the 70 people. And they would try to scare her. Just like we scare witnesses that testify for a capital case. When someone is on trial for their life, accused of murder, let's say, if there are 2 witnesses that saw what happened, the person gets convicted and killed. So what the court does is they scare the witnesses to make sure they're not giving false testimony, to make sure that they're telling the truth. So just the way that they scare the witnesses, they scare her. And they tell her, Biti, my daughter, Harbe Yainose, you probably drank a lot of wine. You know what happens when you drink a lot of wine. Harbe Schokose, you're probably joking around. You know what happens when you joke around too much. Harbe Yaldasose, you're probably acting like a kid. Harbe Shchenim Haraimaisim, you probably have bad neighbors. You know what happens when you have bad neighbors, bad influences. They're giving her a way out. You really want Hashem's name to be written. You don't want Hashem's name to be written and then get erased in the water. And then they tell her stories about holy people that confess when they did something wrong. And the Mishnah goes on and on. different things. They uncovered her hair. They would rip part of her clothes off in front of all these people, in front of this. Imagine you're in front of the Supreme Court and you have hundreds and hundreds of people, maybe thousands watching, and they did all these things, and they would really try to scare her because they wanted her to confess. Because if she's guilty, they didn't want her, they didn't want her to die. They wanted her to confess if she did something wrong. So also Tosfos points out that according to the letter of the law, they didn't need to bring her in front of the rabbinical court of 70. Halachically, you don't need that, but they did that voluntarily. The reason was because when you're in front of these 70 rabbinic judges, that's a lot more intimidating to be in front of than the 23. So it was much more intimidating. They were really trying to intimidate her. But the question is, this lady knows what the Torah says. Why do you need to go through this whole process of bringing her to Jerusalem, bringing her to the biggest court, trying to give her a way out, saying, maybe you got drunk a little bit and you weren't thinking straight? And why do you need to scare her like we would literally scare witnesses in a capital case?
He wanted to get rid of his wife, so he hired two people to.
What?
He hired two people to.
No,
make trouble.
They could have done that. Well, if he
I'm
really,
sure it was done.
well,
Does it have something to do with offspring?
how do you mean?
Well, they just wanted to make sure that she was being faithful to her husband and not unfaithful.
Right.
And that her offspring would merit. How do I explain this? Offspring would merit not to do what she was accused of.
How do you mean the offspring? All right, get back to it.
No, there's people with bad motivation, so I'm sure.
Well, if he wanted to get his wife, he could have hired witnesses to say that they actually saw. This is where they didn't actually see her doing anything. They saw her like hanging out with the guy secluded.
Oh, okay.
But they didn't. He could have hired people to say that they saw them in the act.
Right.
And if he wanted to do that, and then she would be, her head would she would be
Then
killed.
that would be the way they would go.
Right.
'Cause I'm sure there's a lot of bad actors.
Yeah, no, so that's why anytime there's a capital case, the court is very careful, and like we were saying, to scare the witnesses. If there's a slight deviation in the testimony, then it gets thrown out. But in this case, if she says she's tameh, if she says she did something wrong and confesses, then she just gets divorced and loses her kasuba. She doesn't get a ksuba,
yeah.
but she doesn't get killed, nothing happens. So they're trying to convince her.
Then that makes sense.
Confess, you don't want to risk your life here. But we're asking, why do they have to do all of this? Like, why do they have to convince her? She knows what the Torah says is going to happen. So Chaim Shmulevitz points out another case, an episode in Jewish history that kind of sheds light onto this. So when the Jewish people first entered Israel, the first city they conquered was Jericho. They walked around the city 7 times with the Holy Ark, and the walls fell down, and they conquered the city. So then the pasuk says, in Yeshua, "Vayishbel Yehoshua be'ez hahi." Joshua swore at that moment, Lamar, and said, "Ar ha'ish asher lifnei Hashem asher yakum uvana es ha'ir hazos." Cursed is the person that will rebuild this city, es Yericho, Jericho, bebecharo Yisdana, with his eldest son, the death of his eldest son, he will make the foundations of the city, ubetzir yatziv d'lasel, and with his youngest son, he'll set up its gates. So there's a curse that Joshua said that anyone who rebuilds the city of Jericho, his oldest son will be killed when they make the foundation of the city, and the youngest son will be killed when he makes the gates of the city. So you know what happened?
They didn't rebuild Jericho.
That's what you would have hoped.
Well, it would have made sense.
Malachim Aleph, Tes Zayin Lamed, the book of Kings 1, 1634. B'yamav bana Chiel beis ha'eli es Yericho. In his days, Hiel from Bethel built Jericho. He started rebuilding the city. What happened? Ba'aviram bechoro Yisda. With his firstborn named Aviram, he died when they built the foundations. Ubiskuv, his Tziro, his youngest son named Seguv, Hitziv Laseh, he died when they built the doors. Kidvar Hashem, just like Hashem said, Asher Diber B'yad Yeshua ben Nun, just like he said to Joshua. So here we go, the curse came true, and Rashi explains that all of his other children died in between. The eldest son died when he was making the foundations of the city, and the youngest son died when he was making the walls of the city. So Chaim Shmulevitz points out, this guy, Chiel, who's rebuilding Jericho, he starts rebuilding it, makes the foundation, and his oldest son dies. Why did he keep going? he knew about this curse that was in the book of Joshua.
Well, you test the curse and it proves true.
It literally happened.
You abandoned ship.
I was just reading in a book about the King Tut that people associated with the discovery of King Tut's tomb, many of them started dying and getting sick. So I'm not saying there was anything legitimate there, but people were nervous enough that I think the son of the person who financed the mission wouldn't even go to his father's grave for the rest of his life because he was worried that he was cursed. That's how nervous he was. So I'm just saying people get nervous about these things. But here he starts building Jericho. His first son dies. He keeps going. His second son dies. I don't know how many kids he had. And finishes the city until his youngest son dies. What was he thinking? What was he doing? So Chaim Shmulevitz says, you see how hard it is to admit you're wrong.
That's so true.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
He says people do not want to admit they're wrong. They'll keep going and going even when horrible, horrible things happen to them. So he says
That's as simple as the leaving Egypt, Pyro.
right.
Pharaoh.
Right. Paro wouldn't let the Jews go, even though Hashem was right in his face.
Because his heart was hardened.
Right, Hashem hardened his heart. But here we're saying sometimes you're in a fight with somebody, and you start realizing after a while, maybe you're wrong, but you can't admit it. So many people watching, you're going to admit that you're wrong. That's why if you're ever in a disagreement with somebody, it's good to get a third person, unbiased opinion, because we're very biased. We don't want to admit they're wrong. It's such a hard thing to admit you're wrong. To say, especially when you've been doing something for years and years. Imagine working for something your whole life, and at the end you realize you were wrong. You did something wrong. But here you go. You have this guy who's he thought he could rebuild the city of Jericho. He's probably telling all of his friends, "Yeah, look, what curse? I'm going to rebuild the city. It'll be fine." And then his first son dies. He put, it was a coincidence. Second son, it just happened. He's in a car accident, whatever. There's nothing. And then but he doesn't want to admit. Until all of his kids died, he didn't want to admit that he was wrong. So this is the same thing here by the Sota.
Yeah.
In the Sota, we bring her up and we scare her so much because we know that even though she knows that she's going to die if she did something wrong, it's going to be very hard for her to admit it because people don't want to admit they're wrong. So we bring her in front of the rabbinical court of 71, scare her a little bit. They uncover her hair. They say, try to make excuses for her. Maybe you got drunk, and try to get her to admit that she was wrong. Now, who's the opposite of this? There's a person in Chumash, there's probably more than one person, but one person I'm thinking of, that is known for admitting that he was wrong. And that, his name actually sounds like it. When we are, you and I at least, you're not a Kohen or Levi, right?
No, I'm Yisrael.
Oh, so you and I are descended from him. Darren, not so much, he's a Kohen, unless his mother maybe was a Yisrael.
My mom's a Levi.
Oh, so you probably were from some mother, whatever, if you guys ever intermarried to Yisraelim. But most Yisraelim are from Yehuda, the tribe of Judah. Yehuda was known to admit, famous story in Chumash, he admitted he was wrong. There was a case, his son was married to Tamar, and she was really, in some form, was a Yavam. There's a parsha in the Torah called Yibum, that when a man dies without children, his brother marries his wife.
I heard, yeah.
So this was so her husband died, Yehuda's son died, and she was supposed to be married to someone in the family there. Now it's only a brother. Before the Torah, it could have been a father also. But she was accused of having illicit relations when she really had relations with Yehuda. And they were ready to kill her for having relations with someone she wasn't supposed to have relations with. Now Yehuda realized that, wait a minute, that's Tamar. It was me. I was the one who had relations with her. So really, she shouldn't be killed. She shouldn't have been killed. And he could have kept his mouth shut. And here he's calling for her death. He could have kept his mouth shut. They would have killed her. No one would have known the difference. But Yehuda said, Tzad Kamimeni, she's right. She doesn't deserve to die. I was wrong. Yehuda is
But that's not to protect Tamar, is it?
Yeah, he saved her life, but it was true.
But yeah, that's the part I wanted to ask. It was true, it wasn't false, just to protect her.
But, he didn't. But he also had to admit that he was wrong the whole time.
Okay.
I mean, he had to say.
But his intention was not to protect her, right? Not to protect her because they knew they were going to kill her. She didn't want her to die.
Well, he was the one bringing her to get killed.
Oh,
because he thought she did something wrong, and it turns out he could have gotten away with it. And it turns out that that she was innocent.
Okay.
So he was the only one who. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. I
Okay.
know about that story.
Yeah, it's in Bereshis. Important story.
Gracious. That early?
Oh, not. It's in Chumash Bereshis. I
Okay.
think it's a meek around.
It's not the Parsha Bereshit.
The first. It's in. What do you call it? The first fifth of the Torah. First fifth of the Torah.
Genesis.
It's in
is
Genesis.
Gracious.
Right. Well, you can refer to the first parsha as Bereshis, or the entire first fifth of the Torah as Bereshis.
Oh, I never knew that.
I thought it was just so it's another word for Genesis. It's Bereshit.
Right.
Got it.
Let me just see. Okay. So after Sota, you see what comes up next in the Torah? The very next parsha
Yellow French.
is
Passion.
well, that's part of Sota. After
The Achates, the freshman.
page 758, the Nazir. The Nazir is what comes next. The Nazir was a person who took a special vow. He could not drink wine and didn't cut his hair.
Right.
He took extra stringencies upon himself to serve Hashem. That's a Nazir. So Rashi asks the obvious question. Rashi says in Beis, Ki Yafresh, Lama Nismachu Parshas Nazir la Parshas Sota. Why does the Torah choose to talk about Nazir right after we just talk about the Sota, about this wayward wife? Lomar lecha, to tell you, Shekol haroa Sota b'kilkula Yazir atzma min hayayin shumevi lidi niv. That anyone who sees the Sota procedure, if you are present at the Sota procedure, you should become a Nazir. You should become a Nazir. So there are those that explain, what's this name? I would think, someone who saw the Sota procedure, why should you have to take additional religious stringencies upon yourself? You just saw a woman who committed a sin, and she died because of it. That would definitely be very inspiring to not sin. Right? Imagine, you see somebody, like one of these, you ever see these like instant karma videos where someone does something wrong and they get paid back right away? Imagine if like an atheist would get out outside and like a sinner and say, God, if I'm wrong, strike me down. And all of a sudden a lightning bolt comes out and pow! That would be a very inspirational thing. So this is what the person saw here. They saw the Sota, a woman commit adultery, she exploded, a miracle happened in front of them, and that specifically that person should become a Nazir. So there are those that say, the reason is because if you're inspired by something and you don't do something about it, then you can be worse off than if you weren't even inspired. Anytime you're inspired, you have to do something actively to take it with you. So you saw a Sota, you were inspired, do something proactive, become a Nazir.
Why does that inspire you to see a Sota? Like,
It's inspirational in the sense that you see with your own eyes the reward and punishment that God gives, and the fact that a miracle happened. Nature was changed in front of you. There's no natural explanation for why a woman should drink a certain liquid and her stomach should explode.
it's pretty awful, though. I mean, I would think you'd
So
be
I don't.
traumatized by that.
So I don't mean inspiring in the necessarily like positive sense that you're gonna like sing a happy song about it. I
So
mean,
something similar doesn't happen to you? That's why you become a Nazir?
I mean, you feel like if you kind of feel awful if you saw that. I imagine.
right? But wouldn't it be more real to you, the God's justice, and you would want to maybe think twice before you sin again?
Yeah, but you also think, ooh, this is rough. I mean, you feel bad for the woman that
Yeah,
she
no,
made a
you
mistake.
could definitely
But
feel
you're
bad
afraid,
for her.
You're afraid something similar is going to happen to you. So that's why you take
Oh.
on extra stringencies so it doesn't happen.
So not so much that could be also, but this is more the idea is that inspire. I mean in the sense that you saw a miracle happen, and one of the basis of Jewish belief is that we believe God gives reward and punishment. So there's one thing believing it, and there's one thing seeing it in front of you where it happens. A miracle happens, right? It's like imagine a wicked person meets his end in a miraculous way. That would be very inspiring in the sense they say, wow, God wasn't joking when he said he's going to punish the wicked. Obviously, it means he's going to reward the righteous also. So therefore, we should do something about that. We should take a religious inspiration and become a Nazir and take these extra stringencies upon ourselves and try to make an effort to become closer to Hashem. You don't hear it.
I mean, adultery was pretty common back then. It's pretty common now.
No, but that's the Ramban said that it's not. This sota only worked when adultery wasn't common, right?
Okay.
He said this sota only happened when the people were on a very, very holy level. When people started becoming a little loose in this area, then the sota didn't work at all. So we're talking about very, very holy people in the first place.
Okay.
So the Nazir wants to become on that holy level.
Right.
Wants to come on a higher spiritual level.
Gotcha.
Right. But the idea is that any time in life that you become inspired, the lesson is that you have to do something to take it with you, to take it to the next step. For example, we were together for 3 days in shul on Shavuos. You stayed up all night learning, listening to shiurim, davening. So it's very nice. There's two ways you can look at it. Oh, that was a very nice religious experience I had. Very nice. Now what? I'm going to go back to my regular life. So if you do that, then the next time you go through an inspirational experience, you're not going to be as inspired so much. You may actually become a little cynical. The right approach is to say, you know what, I had such an inspirational Shavuos. I was so close to Hashem. I'm going to take a practical step to come closer to Hashem. I'm going to learn 5 minutes more every day, or whatever it is. Any inspiration you have to take with you and make practical steps. We can go to hear a shiur from an inspiring speaker, an inspiring rabbi, but that by itself will not make us grow as Jews. We have to take the inspiring speech and put something into our lives practically that'll carry it with us.
What about saying Tehillim?
Tehillim also. Yeah, whatever it is. Whatever you can do on your level.
That's what I do right now.
It's very impressive. Tehillim is a very important way to express bitachon and trust in Hashem, to have a dveikus with Hashem, a closeness with Hashem. Whatever it is, every person is different.
Yeah, very inspired by Tehillim.
Okay, and just to conclude with one more thing, I think I might have mentioned this before, that at the end on Shabbos we smell the spices because our extra soul that was with us left, and we feel bad about that. But after Yontiv, there's no spices. The reason there's no spices is because whatever level we gained on the Yontiv never leaves us. So we just had a Shavuos, spent 3 days in shul.
I saw that. So you didn't light the candle, and you didn't know.
So the candle we did Saturday night
on
Shabbos, but we didn't do Besamim, right? We didn't do Besamim.
But we did drink the wine.
Right, the wine. But this is only the Besamim. The reason you smell them usually on Shabbos is because they our extra soul, our neshama yisera leaves us, so we feel bad about that, so we smell the spices. But we don't smell it on Yontiv because that extra soul, that extra level we got, never leaves us.
Is that for every Yontiv?
Every Yontiv. So everything we gained, everyone learned a little bit. We're all in shul, we're all learning a little bit, we all davened, we made an effort to get close to Hashem. So we gained a level. We're different people after Shavuos than we were before. But the main thing is to do something practical from Shavuos. Take something upon ourselves to practically.
Kvad says
moving forward.
study Pirkei Avos.